The drive from my place in Bozeman down to their estate in Whitefish takes about 4.5 hours if the roads are clean. That night in early November, they weren't. I had black ice on the pass outside Big Sky and a steady snow coming down past Belgrade, and I drove the whole stretch with both hands tight on the wheel of my old Ford and a knot in my stomach that wouldn't loosen. My daughter had called me at 6 in the morning. Not crying, that was the thing that worried me. My girl, when she's hurt, she cries. When she's scared and trying to hide it from me, she goes very still and very quiet. And that morning her voice on the phone was the flattest I'd heard it since the year her mother died. She said, "Daddy, can you come up for the weekend? They're doing a dinner Saturday night. The whole family. Cliff would really like you there." Cliff is my son-in-law. Clifford Marrowbridge III, to use the full freight of it. His people own about a third of the timber leases in northwest Montana and most of the lakefront on the south side of Whitefish Lake. They have a guest house that's bigger than the house I raised my daughter in. The first time I met them, at the engagement party 2 years back, the father shook my hand and asked me what line of work I was in, and when I said I'd been a federal prosecutor for 31 years before I retired, he said, "Oh, government work," and turned to refresh his bourbon. I knew right then. You meet enough of those people in my old line of work, you stop needing them to spell it out for you. I said to my daughter, "Sweetheart, what's going on?" And there was a pause on the line. The kind of pause where a person is weighing how much truth they can afford to give you. Then she said, "Nothing, Daddy. I just want you here." So I went, "Let me back up a minute and tell you about my girl. Her name is Holland. She's 29 years old. She has her mother's eyes and her mother's stubbornness and her mother's habit of laughing too loud at her own jokes. And she is, without exaggeration, the only thing in this world I have left that means anything to me. Her mother passed when Holland was 16, pancreatic cancer. 8 months from the diagnosis to the funeral, and after that it was just the two of us in the house in Bozeman. I cooked bad spaghetti, she taught me how to braid hair so I could help her get ready for school, and we got through it. We got through everything together. She went to Montana State, got her teaching degree, came back home, and took a job at the elementary school out in Belgrade teaching 2nd grade. Loved it. Lived it. The kids in her class made her cards on her birthday that she taped up on the fridge in her little apartment. And when I'd go over for dinner, she'd read them out loud to me one by one, laughing at the misspellings. Then she met Clifford at a fundraiser for the volunteer fire department. He was charming. I'll give him that. Tall, well-spoken, a little too smooth around the edges if you knew what to look for. But Holland didn't know what to look for. Why would she? She'd grown up with me, a man who said what he meant and meant what he said. She didn't have the vocabulary for a man like Cliff. They got engaged after 8 months, married after 14. The wedding was at the Marrowbridge estate on the lake. 300 guests, an ice sculpture of 2 swans, and a sit-down dinner with 3 forks per place setting. I wore rented tux and felt every inch the country prosecutor among the timber money. My daughter looked at me across the reception and mouthed, "I love you, Daddy." And I figured that was all I needed. That was 19 months before the phone call. I drove into Whitefish a little after 11 on Saturday morning. Pulled up the long gravel drive to the Marrowbridge place. Big stone and timber pile sitting up on a rise above the lake. And there was Holland coming out the front door to meet me. Before I'd even cut the engine, she was wearing a turtleneck. November in Montana, sure, but she always ran hot, my girl. Her mother used to joke she had a furnace inside her, and she was wearing a turtleneck pulled right up under her chin and long sleeves, and when she came around to hug me I felt her flinch when my arm went across her back. I held her at arm's length, looked at her face. She gave me a smile that didn't reach anywhere near her eyes and said, "You made good time." Holland. "Daddy, please, not now. Just come inside." I have spent my professional life reading people. Witnesses, defendants, jurors. You learn to see the small things, the tells. Nobody knows they're giving away. My daughter had a tell from the time she was 4 years old. When she was lying to protect somebody, she would tuck her left hand inside her right elbow. She did it when she broke her mother's vase and blamed it on the cat. She did it the time she snuck out at 15 to a party and told me she'd been at the library. She was doing it now. standing on the steps of her husband's family home, and her wrist, when I caught a glimpse of it, where the sleeve rode up, was wrapped in an ace bandage the color of putty. I didn't say anything. Not yet. I'd taught her enough to know that confronting it on the front steps was the worst thing I could do. So I picked up my overnight bag and followed her inside, and I started watching. Cliff met us in the foyer, clapped me on the shoulder, said, "Calvin, good to have you. The old man's been asking after you." His father, that is. Clifford Marrowbridge II, the patriarch. I'd met the old man maybe 4 times. Each time I came away thinking he was the kind of man who confused volume for authority and inheritance for accomplishment. He was waiting in the great room with a glass of something brown in his hand at 11:30 in the morning, and he looked up when I came in and gave me the same handshake he'd given me at the engagement party. Up, down. Done. Calvin. Holland says you drove all night. Just this morning, sir. Roads weren't bad. He looked me up and down. I was wearing jeans and a flannel and the boots I wear for everything. Make yourself at home. Dinner's at 7. We dress. I brought a jacket. That was the welcome. The afternoon was strange. I asked Holland to walk down to the lake with me, and she said she had to help with the preparations. And Cliff's mother, a thin woman named Eudora, who I'd never heard say a complete sentence in her life, took her by the arm and led her off toward the kitchen. Cliff suggested I come watch the football game. So I sat in a leather chair in the den, and I watched Cliff and his father drink and shout at the television. And I noted that every time Holland came into the room with a tray of something or a question about the table settings, both of them stopped talking until she was gone. Around 3:30, I went looking for her. Found her in the pantry off the kitchen, alone, sitting on a step stool, and she'd taken the bandage off her wrist to readjust it. And I saw it. It was a hand, the shape of a hand, in green and yellow and that dark wine color a bruise gets after a few days. The fingers had wrapped almost the whole way around. Whoever had done it was bigger than her, and angry when they did it, and they had held on long enough and hard enough to crush the small vessels under her skin. She saw me see it. She tried to pull her sleeve down, and I crossed the pantry in 2 steps and knelt down on the floor in front of the step stool and took her good hand in both of mine. "Sweetheart, Daddy, please don't make this a thing. Tell me." "I can't." "Tell me who." She looked at the door, looked back at me. She was not going to cry, my girl, because she had decided a long time ago that crying made things worse. But her eyes had that wet glass look they got when she was a little girl, and she'd skinned her knee and she was trying to be brave about it. She said, "Cliff's father, that Tuesday breakfast." I poured the coffee wrong. I poured it from the wrong side. "He grabbed me," he said. She stopped, took a breath. "He said I needed to learn how to serve a man properly because clearly nobody had taught me. And Cliff was sitting right there, Daddy. He was sitting right there, and he didn't say anything. He just looked at his plate." I held her hand. I didn't move. I didn't speak for a long moment, because a man my age has learned that the first words out of his mouth in a moment like that are almost always the wrong ones. And I've spent enough of my life saying the wrong words at the wrong time. Then I said, "Has he done it before?" "Not like that." "What does that mean, Holland?" "It means he's grabbed my arm a couple of times. He's a grabber, Daddy. He's the kind of man who, when he wants your attention, he takes it. I didn't think anything of it before. He's like that with the dogs, too. The dogs. My daughter comparing herself to the dogs. And Cliff says it's just his way. Cliff says, 'Daddy, please, I'm asking you. Please, I'm asking you. Please don't do anything tonight. Please, Cliff will be so embarrassed. They'll be so angry. Just get through dinner with me. Please, I'll figure it out. I just needed you here. I just needed someone here who knew I wasn't crazy.' I want you to understand what was going through my mind in that pantry. I want you to understand because it matters for what came later. I have, in my career, prosecuted men who beat their wives, men who hit their children, men who thought money or power or family name put them outside the reach of the laws the rest of us live by. I prosecuted a county commissioner once who broke his wife's jaw and told the responding officer she'd fallen down the stairs. And I made sure that man went away for 9 years. And the day the verdict came down, his wife sent me a card that just said, "Thank you. Nothing else." I have spent my life on the other side of the table for men like Clifford Marybridge II, and now one of them had put his hands on my daughter. And my daughter, my Holland, was asking me to sit through dinner. I said, "I'll sit through dinner." She breathed out. I said, "I want you to do one thing for me. After dinner, when we say goodnight, I want you to come down to the guest room. Just for a minute. Just to say goodnight to your old dad. Will you do that?" "Yes." "Good. Now help me up. My knees aren't what they used to be." She laughed. It was small, but it was real, and it was the first real thing I'd heard from her all day. I went back to the den, and I watched the rest of the football game, and I let Clifford II pour me a glass of his bourbon, and I made small talk about the weather and the elk season and a piece of timber legislation he was complaining about, and I watched him. I watched the way he spoke to the housekeeper, the way he interrupted his wife when she tried to ask about dinner, the way he laughed at his own jokes a half-second before the punchline, the way his son, my son-in-law, leaned in and laughed along whether the joke was funny or not. I watched Cliff, my daughter's husband, the man who had stood at the altar 19 months ago and promised to love her and protect her, and who had sat at his father's breakfast table 4 days ago and watched his father grab her by the wrist hard enough to leave a handprint, and who had said nothing. You learn things watching. I learned that Cliff was afraid of his father. I learned that he had probably always been afraid of his father. I learned that whatever spine he might once have had, it had been broken in him a long time ago, in some small ways, and probably some not-so-small ways. And what was left was a man who would let his wife be hurt, rather than make his father angry. I felt sorry for him. For about 90 seconds, I felt sorry for him. Then I remembered the bruise on my daughter's wrist, and I stopped feeling sorry for him. Dinner was at 7, like the man had said. There were 11 of us at the table. Clifford II at the head, his wife Eudora at the far end, Cliff and Holland on one side, me across from them, Cliff's older sister and her husband, 2 cousins, an uncle, and a family friend, who turned out to be the Marybridge family attorney, a man named Pendleton, with silver hair and a smile like a closed drawer. The dining room was long and dark-paneled and lit by an iron chandelier that had probably been imported from somewhere expensive. There was a fire in the stone fireplace. There were 6 wine glasses per setting. A woman in a black uniform brought out the soup. Holland sat very straight in her chair. She had her left hand in her lap, hidden under the napkin. With her right hand she ate her soup slowly, one small spoonful at a time. Conversation went around the table. The timber market. The new neighbor down the lake who was apparently from California and was apparently building something vulgar. The cousin's golf game. The uncle's hunting trip. I let it wash over me. I answered when spoken to. I watched. About 20 minutes in, Holland reached for her water glass with her left hand. She forgot just for a second, and the sleeve of her dress slid back, and the bandage was visible. Clifford II saw it. He smiled. He actually smiled. He put down his fork, and he looked across the table at me, and he said, "Calvin, your girl had a little tumble this week, walked into a door frame. You raised her clumsy." The table laughed. Politely. Pendleton the lawyer smiled into his wine. Holland went red from her throat up to her hairline. She said, "I'm fine." I looked at the old man. I kept my voice very level. I said, "That doesn't look like a door frame." The room got quieter. Not silent. Quieter. Clifford II laughed. He said, "Are you a doctor now, Calvin? On top of all your other talents? I've seen a few bruises in my time. I'll bet you have. Government work, after all." Government work, after all. Government work, I agreed. He took a long drink of his wine. He was enjoying himself. I had seen this kind of man enjoy himself 100 times in courtrooms, in depositions, in the long, terrible hallways outside hearing rooms. He thought he was at the top of his food chain. He thought he was the biggest predator in the room. He thought I was the soft old man who'd shown up uninvited to ruin his weekend. He said, "Tell me, Calvin, what does a retired government man do with his time these days? Fish? Whittle? A little of both." He looked at his son. "Cliff says you put your daughter through college on a federal salary. That's impressive. Frugal living, I imagine." We did all right. Not everybody's cut out for it. The frugal life. Holland, sweetheart, you came up in modest circumstances. You did. Nothing to be ashamed of, but there's a way of doing things in this family, and I think we're all still learning, aren't we? He reached across the corner of the table and he took my daughter's left wrist. He took it right where the bruise was. He didn't squeeze. He just held it. He held it where everyone could see, where I could see, and he smiled at me while he did it. He said, "We're teaching her." I want to tell you what I did in that moment, because I think it is the most important thing I have ever done in my life, and I want to get it right. I did not stand up. I did not raise my voice. I did not reach across the table. I picked up my napkin from my lap. I folded it in half. I set it next to my plate. I looked at my daughter, and her eyes were enormous, and I gave her the smallest nod I could manage. Then I looked at Clifford Marrowbridge II, and I said very quietly, "Take your hand off my daughter." He laughed. He said, "Or what, old-timer? You gonna cry about it?" I said it again. "Take your hand off my daughter." "You want to make me?" I said. "I would like you to consider very carefully the next 30 seconds of your life. I would like you to take your hand off my daughter, and I would like you to apologize to her, and then I would like you to sit there and say nothing while I have a small conversation with this table. If you do those 3 things, in that order, the rest of your life will go more or less the way you have been planning for it to go. If you do not do those 3 things, the rest of your life is going to look very different starting at approximately 7:30 on Monday morning." The table had gone all the way silent now. He kept his hand where it was. He said, "Are you threatening me?" "No, sir. I am offering you a kindness, out of respect for my daughter, who loves your son, for reasons that escape me at present. You're a guest in my house. I am her father. That outranks you. Take your hand off her." I think it was the quiet that did it. I have seen it before. Men like him, they expect shouting. They are prepared for shouting. They have a whole arsenal for shouting. What they are not prepared for is the man across the table who has already decided, in some quiet place where the decisions get made, that he is not going to shout. He is just going to act. He took his hand off her. Holland pulled her arm back into her lap. She did not look at him. She looked at me. I said, "Thank you. Now apologize to her." He stared at me. He had gone red in the face, the kind of red a heavy drinker gets when his blood is up. The lawyer Pendleton had set down his glass. Cliff was looking at his plate. Eudora at the end of the table was looking at her hands. The old man said, "I will not be talked to this way in my own house. Then I'll talk to you outside it. Get out in a moment. Apologize to her first. Get out of my house." I looked at the table. I looked at the lawyer Pendleton in particular, because it was clear to me that he was the one in this room with the most to lose by the wrong words being spoken. I said, "Mr. Pendleton." He flinched. He had not expected to be addressed. I said, "You know who I am, don't you?" He didn't answer. I said, "You looked me up. The day Holland and Cliff got engaged, somebody at this table had me looked up. And I'm guessing it was you, because that's what family lawyers do. So you know." "Calvin, you know that I was a federal prosecutor in the District of Montana for 31 years. You know I was the deputy chief of the criminal division for the last 12. You know who I worked with, and you know who I still know. You want to tell the table, or do you want me to?" Pendleton said very carefully, "Mr. Marrowbridge, perhaps we should." "Shut up, Pendleton," the old man said. Pendleton shut up. I said, "Here is what is going to happen. I am going to leave this table. I am going to take my daughter with me. She is going to pack a bag, and she is going to come home with me to Bozeman tonight, and she is going to stay with me for as long as she needs to stay. While she is doing that, I am going to make one phone call. Just one. To a man I trained 22 years ago, who is now the United States Attorney for this district. I'm going to tell him about a conversation I once had with a colleague of mine in the criminal division about certain irregularities in the timber lease bidding on federal land in the Flathead National Forest, going back to 2009. Irregularities that were not, at the time, pursued because the witness we needed got cold feet, and there were budget priorities, and the file was quietly closed. But the file exists. The file still exists, gentlemen. Files don't go away, and I am going to suggest to the United States Attorney that the file might benefit from a fresh set of eyes. Clifford II had gone from red to white. The shift took about 4 seconds. I watched it happen. He said, "You don't have anything." I don't need to have anything. I need to make a phone call. The phone call is the thing. After the phone call, other people will have things. That's how it works. You know that. You've always known that. That's why you keep Mr. Pendleton on retainer. I stood up. I picked up my napkin and folded it again and laid it on the table. I said, "Holland, sweetheart, get your coat." She stood up. She didn't say anything to anyone. She walked around the table to me, and I put my arm around her shoulders, and I felt her shaking, and I held her steady. Cliff said, "Holland, wait." She didn't turn around. He said, "Holland, please, please don't." She stopped at the door of the dining room. She turned. She looked at her husband, and I will tell you, in that moment, my daughter looked exactly like her mother, and her mother could level a man with a look. She said, "Cliff, he grabbed me, and you sat there. You sat there, and you ate your eggs." He didn't have anything to say to that. There wasn't anything to say to that. We walked out of the dining room. We walked up the wide oak staircase to the bedroom that had been hers and Cliff's. She packed a bag, mostly with shaking hands, and I helped her with the things she couldn't quite manage on account of the wrist. I went around the room and made sure she had what she needed. Her teaching plans for Monday. Her grandmother's ring, which she'd left in a small dish on the dresser. A photograph of her mother that she kept in the drawer of the nightstand. At the bottom of the stairs, the lawyer Pendleton was waiting. He said very softly, "Mr. Hollister, a word." I walked Holland out to the truck first. Got her settled in the passenger seat with the heater running. Then I came back to the front porch where Pendleton was standing in the cold without a coat. He said, "Was it true? About the file?" I looked at him. I said, "Mr. Pendleton, I'm about to give you a piece of advice, and I'm going to give it to you for free, because nobody gave it to me when I was your age, and I wish they had. The advice is this. There are some men whose money you should not take. Walk away from this family. Walk away tonight, by Tuesday afternoon at the latest. I am not going to tell you what's going to happen on Monday morning. But I am going to tell you that whatever it is, you do not want to be the lawyer of record when it does." He was quiet a long time. He said, "The bruise. Yes. There have been others." I closed my eyes. I opened them. I said, "Then you have known for longer than I have, sir, and you have done nothing. And that is between you and your conscience. But you can start doing something now. Tonight. Walk away." He nodded. I got in the truck. We drove off the Marebridge property at 8:40 in the evening, and Holland cried for the first hour, and I let her. And I didn't say anything because there wasn't anything to say. Outside Kalispell, I pulled into a gas station and got her a coffee and a package of those little powdered donuts she's loved since she was 6 years old, and she laughed a little when I handed them to her, and that was the second real laugh I'd heard from her that day. We got home to Bozeman a little after 1 in the morning. I put her in her old bedroom. The sheets were the same ones from when she was in high school. She fell asleep almost immediately. I sat on the edge of her bed for a while and watched her sleep, the way I used to when she was small and sick. Then I went out to the kitchen and I made the phone call. It was a Sunday morning by then. I called the man I had trained 22 years before, who is now the United States Attorney for the District of Montana, and I apologized for waking him, and I told him I wanted to talk about an old file. I told him about the timber leases. I told him about a witness I had once interviewed who lived in Whitefish and who had, 8 years ago, told me a story I had not been able to corroborate at the time, but had never quite been able to forget. I told him I thought it was time to go talk to that witness again. He listened. When I was done, he said, "Calvin, are you all right?" I said, "My daughter's all right. I'll be all right when she is." He said, "Send me what you have on Monday." I sent him what you have on Monday. I sent him what I had on Monday. The grand jury convened 91 days later. Clifford Marrowbridge II was indicted on 17 counts, ranging from bid rigging on federal lands to wire fraud to obstruction of justice. The federal lawyer Pendleton had walked away by then, which I had heard through the grapevine, and the lawyer they hired to replace him cost 3 times as much and was half as effective. The trial took 6 weeks. The old man got 11 years in a federal facility outside Sheridan, Wyoming. He's there now. He'll be there until he's an actual old-timer, the kind he had pretended to see in me. His son. My former son-in-law. Cliff. Cliff was not indicted. He was not a target. The U.S. Attorney's Office made the decision early that he had not been substantially involved in the timber matters, and I did not push. That was not my call to make. But I did make a different call. I called a friend of mine on the Montana State Bar, and I told him a story about a man in Whitefish who had watched his wife be assaulted at the breakfast table and had said nothing, and I said I thought the bar might want to look into Mr. Sars, Marrowbridge's character and fitness, given that he was a licensed financial advisor with fiduciary responsibilities. The bar opened an inquiry. It is still open. Holland filed for divorce 11 days after we drove off the property. The Marrowbridges fought it. She won everything. The ring, which had been in his family. The wedding gifts, which she sent back, every one of them. She didn't ask for $1. She just asked to be free. And she got free. She stayed with me for 4 months. We cooked bad spaghetti together. She started teaching again at her school in Belgrade in January. The kids in her 2nd grade class made her cards welcoming her back, and I helped her tape them up on the fridge of the apartment she moved into in February, a little place not far from mine. The bruise on her wrist faded. It took about 3 weeks. The other things took longer. Some of them are still taking time. But she sleeps through the night now. She laughs at her own jokes again. She has started seeing a young man, a high school history teacher, who came over for dinner last Sunday and shook my hand and looked me in the eye when he did it and asked me what I had done before retirement, and when I told him, he said, "That sounds like meaningful work, sir." And I thought, all right, we will see. But all right, I want to tell you something before I close this out. I have spent a lot of my life thinking about what makes a man. I prosecuted bad men for 31 years, and I tried to be a good one for longer than that. And if I have learned anything, it is this. A man is not what he says about himself. A man is not the size of his house or the name on his deeds or the title he carries. A man is what he does in the room when somebody he loves is being hurt. That is the whole of it. Everything else is decoration. Clifford Marrowbridge II sat at the head of his table, and he laid his hand on my daughter's wrist where the bruise was, and he smiled at me while he did it, and he believed all the way down that he had the bigger life. He believed that his money and his name and his timber leases made him the man at the table. He was wrong. The man at the table is the one who stands up when a child is hurt. It does not matter if he stands up loud or quiet. It does not matter if he is a prosecutor or a plumber. It matters that he stands up. I want to tell every father watching this, and every grandfather, and every uncle, and every brother, and every man who has ever loved a girl and been afraid for her, you stand up. When the time comes, and the time will come, because it always does, you stand up. You do not need a federal file in your back pocket. You do not need money or a name or a title. You need the willingness to put your napkin on the table and look the man in the eye and tell him to take his hand off your child. That is all you need. The rest is just paperwork. Holland called me last night. She said the history teacher is going to ask her to dinner on Friday, somewhere fancy, and she wanted to know if I'd help her pick out a dress. I said I would. I am the worst dress picker in the state of Montana, but I am her father, and she asked, and so I will go. I will tell you how it turns out. If you have a story like mine, and you've held it in for too long because you thought nobody wanted to hear it, leave it down below. I read them all. Everyone. To listen to the next story, click the video on your screen. Take care of your daughters, gentlemen. They are watching to see what kind of man you are. They have always been watching. I sat at my kitchen table the morning after we drove home from Whitefish, watching my daughter sleep in her old bedroom down the hall, and I thought about cause and effect. 31 years of prosecuting men taught me one thing above all else. Every cruelty a man commits is a debt. He may not pay it on Tuesday. He may not pay it on the Tuesday after that. But the ledger keeps itself, and the bill comes due. Clifford Marybridge believed his money had bought him a different ledger. He believed his name and his timber leases and his long oak dining table made him exempt from the simple arithmetic the rest of us live by. So when he laid his hand on my Holland's wrist at his own table and smiled at me while he did it, he was not committing a single act of cruelty. He was making a withdrawal from an account he had been emptying for years. The handprint on my daughter's wrist was just the receipt that finally reached the right desk. I have thought a lot about what I want to leave behind for the young men who might be watching this. Not money. I don't have much of that, and what I have is going to my girl. What I want to leave is 3 things, and they are the 3 things I tried to live by, even when I fell short, which was often. The first is decency, not the soft kind that says nothing when something needs to be said. The hard kind, the kind that puts a napkin on the table and looks a bigger man in the eye and refuses to be quiet while a child gets hurt. Decency is not a feeling. It is an action you take when the action is going to cost you something. The second is sense, the kind that tells you, when you are angry, to slow down, to watch, to gather what you need before you move. I did not stand up the moment I saw the bruise in the pantry. I sat through dinner. I let him show me who he was in front of witnesses. That was not weakness. That was patience, which is just intelligence wearing work clothes. The third is grit. The willingness to drive 4.5 hours through black ice because your daughter's voice on the phone sounded wrong. The willingness to make the call you have been hoping you would never have to make. The willingness to sit on the edge of her bed at 1 a.m. and stay there until she falls asleep, even though your back is killing you and the world has gone sideways. A man who has those 3 things does not need to be the loudest at the table. He does not need the biggest house or the longest deed or the family name carved into stone. He needs to be the one who stands up. Everything I did that night, every piece of it, came from the man my own father tried to raise me to be. I tried to pass that on to Holland. I hope when my time comes, she passes it on too. The ledger keeps itself. We just have to keep our own pages clean.